Loriane had always believed politeness and kindness was her only real currency. She wasn't wealthy, she wasn't powerful, and she certainly wasn't glamorous like the women who swept through the cafe in their designer heels. But she was polite, steady, and gentle with everyone. From the old man who never tipped to the cranky office workers who snapped when their orders were late. To her, being polite and kind wasn't weakness. It was survival. That was the day Bryson Pierce noticed her. He was a billionaire with a reputation as sharp as glass, calculating, commanding, impossible to impress. Men feared him, women chased him, but no one ever dared look at him with softness. No one except Loriane, who set his coffee down with the same quiet respect she gave everyone without expectation or judgment. For Bryson, it was disarming. He was used to masks, flattery, and false devotion. But here was a woman who smiled at him, not because of his money, but because that's who she was. Polite, kind, genuine. He told himself it was nothing, just a passing detail in an ordinary day. Yet he found himself returning to the cafe again and again, just to hear her gentle, "Good morning," as if it were meant only for him. And that simple kindness? It was about to turn her routine life upside down. The bell above the cafe door gave its usual tired rattle, almost swallowed by the rain hammering against the windows. I was already damp from my walk-in. My coat never held the weather out the way I wished it would, and the smell of wet asphalt still clung to me as I tied my apron tight. The morning crowd shuffled in one by one, shoulders hunched, umbrellas dripping, shoes squeaking across the tiles. I did what I always did, smiled. A soft, polite smile that didn't cost me anything but somehow felt like the last bit of armor I had left. "Good morning, Mr. Hall," I said, as the old man slid onto his usual stool at the counter. He never tipped, not once in 2 years, but I treated him no different than the young office girls who flashed bracelets on their wrists like they owned the world. The usual? He just grunted. I poured the coffee anyway, steady hands, though my mind was already tallying yesterday's tips. $9.25. That was what I had tucked in my pocket. Rent was due in 4 days. I didn't want to count how far I still had to go. The office crowd stormed in next, half awake, half furious at the weather. One barked out his order without looking at me. Another slammed coins on the counter when I told him we were out of blueberry muffins. My cheeks burned, but I swallowed it down, kept my smile stitched in place. Politeness wasn't weakness. It was survival. Rowena, my coworker, leaned close as she slid a tray into the dishwasher. "You're a saint," she whispered, shaking her head. "One of these days, you're gonna snap and throw hot coffee in someone's face." I laughed softly, though my heart didn't feel light. "Maybe," I said, "but not today." She rolled her eyes, but her grin was fond. Rowena had the kind of sharp tongue that could cut glass, but she'd been my only friend in this city. When the loneliness pressed too heavy, she was the one who cracked jokes until I breathed again. The door swung open then, a gust of cold rain following the man who stepped inside. And for some reason, the room seemed to hush, even the clatter of forks and the hiss of the espresso machine dimming. I didn't recognize him at first. Tall, broad-shouldered, coat cut from some fabric I could never afford. His eyes were sharp, scanning, as if the cafe wasn't a place but a battlefield. When he shook the water from his hair, I caught a better look, dark, swept back with purpose, and the air around him felt charged. "Loriane," Rowena hissed at my side, elbowing me. "That's Bryson Pierce." I blinked. "Who?" Her eyes widened. "You live under a rock? He's the billionaire, the one with half the city in his pocket." She lowered her voice. "The one who ruined 3 companies in a single year and made a fortune doing it." I glanced again. His jaw was set like steel, and people shifted without him saying a word, as if instinctively giving him space. I should have felt fear, or at least awe. Instead, all I saw was a man who looked out of place in a cafe where the ceiling leaked if the rain lasted too long. Still, I wiped my palms on my apron and walked over. My heart thudded, not because of his wealth, but because something about his gaze felt heavy. "Good morning," I said, the same way I always did. Warm, steady, no judgment. "What can I get you?" His eyes flickered, a fraction of surprise. "Coffee," he said at last, his voice low, controlled. "Black." I nodded, poured it into a plain white mug, and set it before him with the same care I gave to Mr. Hall or the cranky office men. He studied me as I worked, and for a moment, I thought maybe I'd smudged my eyeliner or had flour on my cheek. But no, it was something else, something searching. "Do you know who I am?" he asked finally, one brow lifting. I smiled. "Rowena told me. Bryson Pierce." "And you're not nervous?" I shrugged. "It's just coffee." For a moment, I thought he might laugh, but he only leaned back, studying me like I'd broken some rule he didn't know existed. The bell above the door rang again, snapping me back to my rhythm. More customers, more orders, more polite smiles. But every time I glanced toward the counter, Bryson Pierce was still there. Untouched coffee before him, eyes fixed not on his phone or the rain outside, but on me. When the rush eased, I gathered the coins from my pocket again, counting. Still too short. Always too short. My chest tightened, but I breathed through it, kept my smile stitched tight when Rowena cracked another joke about me marrying rich one day. I shook my head. "Not my style." "Maybe it's about to be," she teased, nodding at the billionaire who hadn't moved. I ignored her, wiped down the counter, tried not to feel the weight of his gaze. Tried not to wonder why a man like him would come here of all places, why he'd linger when he clearly had boardrooms to dominate and empires to build. When I finally dared to look up again, his mouth curved just slightly. Not a smile, but not the stone mask he'd worn when he first walked in either. It startled me, and when I turned away, heat rose to my cheeks. Would you believe a single good morning could change someone's life forever? The rain lingered in the days that followed, pressing its damp fingers against the windows of the café, seeping into every corner of the little shop as though the weather itself conspired to keep things heavy. Yet Loriane moved through it all with the same quiet smile she always wore. Customers came and went, snapping at delays, complaining about the weather, shoving coins onto the counter without thanks. She bore it the way she always had, polite, steady, as if courtesy could shield her from the world's sharper edges. Kindness had been her only defense for as long as she could remember. Life had taught her early that power belonged to others, to landlords who scoffed when she asked for time, to employers who passed her over, to lovers who walked away because she wasn't dazzling enough to keep them. Each disappointment could have hardened her. Instead, she polished her edges softer. She convinced herself that if she stayed gentle, the blows would not shatter her. Survival through softness. Strength through kindness. It was all she had. But beneath that smile lived the quiet terror of losing even this fragile routine. The café paid little. The rent always loomed too high, and her tips rarely stretched far enough. Each night she counted coins with a silent prayer, afraid of what would happen if one day she fell behind. That fear clung to her even as she wiped tables and filled cups, a shadow she carried with practiced grace. Rowena, her co-worker, saw it more clearly than most. Sharp-tongued and quick with laughter, Rowena teased Loriane endlessly for her unshakable politeness. "One of these days," she muttered while stacking plates, "you're going to snap and pour scalding coffee down some banker's lap. And I'll cheer louder than anyone." Loriane only smiled, brushing hair from her damp forehead. "Not today, Rowena. Maybe never." Rowena snorted, but her gaze softened. She might mock, but she admired that gentleness all the same. Across town, in a world of steel towers and gleaming glass, Bryson Pierce lived by the opposite creed. He had never valued kindness, not once. Power was the only currency worth trading. In boardrooms, he was feared, his voice a blade that cut through hesitation. He had dismantled companies with precision, stripped rivals to nothing with a single calculated strike. People whispered his name as though invoking a storm. Bryson Pierce, untouchable, ruthless, cold. His empire glittered, built on control and calculation. Yet behind the sheen, he carried an emptiness that no acquisition could fill. Loneliness pressed at him, though he would never admit it aloud. Family wounds festered beneath his armor, an estranged father, old betrayals, the ache of learning too young that love was fragile and dangerous. To survive, he had shut the door on softness long ago. And then he stepped into a rain-soaked café and found a woman who greeted him with a warmth that neither flattered nor feared. The contrast unsettled him. Where others bowed or trembled, Loriane simply poured his coffee, her voice gentle, her eyes steady. No mask, no hidden motive. It was almost offensive in its simplicity. Almost. And yet he found himself returning, as though her kindness had drawn a thread around him he could not sever. She noticed the way his gaze lingered, but tried not to dwell on it. To her, he was a man from another world, a man who could never understand why she still offered respect to customers who treated her like glassware. She valued humanity. He valued power. They were opposites, orbiting in worlds that should never collide. But they were colliding all the same. It was Curtis, the cafe's janitor, who first revealed the quiet pull Bryson felt. Curtis was older, shoulders bent from years of hard work, hands rough from chemicals. Most customers ignored him, brushing past as though he were invisible. Loriane never did. When his mop bucket cracked one afternoon, spilling dirty water across the floor, she knelt without hesitation, laughing softly as it splashed across her shoes. "Don't worry, Curtis," she said, wringing out a rag. "It's only water. We'll get it cleaned up." Curtis's face flushed with gratitude. "Thank you, Miss Loriane." Bryson, sitting at his usual place near the window, watched the exchange with narrowed eyes. He did not understand it. Why waste gentleness on a man the world overlooked? Why bend when she could stand aloof like everyone else? He left that day without touching his coffee, the question lodged in his mind like a splinter. The next morning, he was back. And in his tower office, Clarita noticed the pattern too. She had worked beside Bryson for years, his assistant and gatekeeper, her ambition as polished as the pearl earrings she wore. She knew his habits, his precision, the way his days ran like clockwork, which was why the sudden detours unsettled her. Meetings shifted, calls delayed. Every morning he disappeared into the rain before work. Clarita buried her jealousy beneath practiced smiles, but it burned all the same. She had waited years for a glance that meant more than efficiency, for a moment when he might see her as something beyond an asset. And now there was something new drawing him away. She made a note to find out what. Back in the cafe, Rowena leaned across the counter one morning, smirking as Bryson lingered at his table. "He's not here for the coffee," she whispered. Loriane shook her head, cheeks warming. "Don't be silly." "I'm not silly. I'm observant." Rowena nudged her with her elbow. "And if I didn't know better, I'd say you've caught the eye of the most dangerous man in the city." Loriane refused to believe it. Men like Bryson Pierce did not notice women like her. She was polite, ordinary, scraping rent together with spare change. Whatever curiosity flickered in his gaze, it could not last. And yet, each morning he returned, his presence cutting through the steady rhythm of her days like lightning through rain. She told herself it meant nothing. Still, when she caught him watching as she helped Curtis carry a heavy box to the back, or when he lingered after the crowd had gone just to hear her say good morning, her heart betrayed her with its quickening beat. Bryson did not understand her world. She did not understand his. But somewhere between her gentleness and his hunger for control, something had begun to shift. And though neither of them knew it yet, that fragile thread of kindness was about to pull both into a storm neither could escape. The rain became a kind of metronome in the days that followed, ticking out the rhythm of an ordinary life that no longer felt so ordinary. Loriane noticed the shift even before she dared to admit it to herself. Bryson Pierce, billionaire, storm in human form, was no longer a chance visitor. He had returned the next morning and the one after that, until his presence became as regular as the hiss of the espresso machine. He always sat in the same seat, near the window where condensation blurred the view of the street. He ordered the same thing, black coffee, no sugar, and said little else. Yet his gaze carried weight, following her movements across the café like a question he refused to voice. Rowena teased her relentlessly. "Do you know what that means?" she whispered while drying mugs. "The man's hooked. He's got more money than sense. But apparently your good morning is his favorite drug." Loriane shook her head, cheeks warming despite herself. "You're imagining things." "Am I?" Rowena leaned closer, smirking. "Because I've never seen Bryson Pierce sit this still for anyone. And believe me, I read the gossip columns. They say he eats rivals for breakfast. Yet here he is, waiting on your smile." Loriane tried to laugh it off, but the truth pressed close. His return unsettled her. Not because he frightened her, though she knew his reputation well enough now, but because he saw her. Not as background, not as the polite girl behind the counter, but as something he wanted to understand. And that attention, however quiet, threatened to unravel the safety she had built in anonymity. It all came to a head on a Thursday morning. The café was unusually crowded, the air damp with coats and impatience. A businessman in a wrinkled suit snapped his fingers at her, demanding his order with a voice sharp enough to slice. When she placed the cup before him, he sneered at the coins she handed back. "Figures," he muttered, loud enough for others to hear. "Girl like you, stuck here. Probably too stupid to work anywhere else." The words burned, but Loriane swallowed them. She had been called worse, dismissed more cruelly. Kindness, she reminded herself. Smile. Survive. But before she could step back, another voice cut through the room, low, commanding, and edged with steel. "Apologize." The café went silent. Bryson Pierce stood at the counter, eyes locked on the businessman with a gaze that could have frozen fire. His presence filled the space, a force so palpable that even Rowena straightened from her usual slouch. The man stammered, color draining from his face. I didn't mean—" "You did," Bryson said evenly, his tone brooking no argument. "Apologize. Now." The businessman's mouth opened, then closed. Finally, he muttered a weak, "Sorry," before fleeing with his cup, shoulders hunched as though escaping judgment. Loriane stood frozen, the tray trembling in her hands. No one had ever defended her like that, not with such power, not with such finality. She forced her voice steady. "You didn't have to do that." Bryson's gaze shifted to her, softer now, but still unnervingly intense. "Yes," he said quietly. "I did." He left without another word. The next morning, he returned. This time, when the rush ended and Rowena retreated to the back with a knowing grin, Bryson remained at the counter, his coffee untouched. Loriane approached cautiously, wiping her hands on her apron. "Something wrong with the brew?" she asked, attempting lightness. He studied her, his expression unreadable. "Do you like it here?" She blinked. "The café?" He nodded. Her smile faltered. "It's a job. It pays the rent. That's enough." "Is it?" The question struck deeper than she wanted to admit. Enough? Maybe. Safe? Barely? Sustainable? Not at all. But she had long since taught herself not to want more, because wanting more meant disappointment. She straightened, masking the ache with politeness. "It's what I have." For a moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the drip of rain down the glass. Then Bryson leaned forward, his voice low, measured. "You could have more. You should have more." Her chest tightened. "What are you saying?" He reached into his coat and slid a card across the counter, the edges crisp, the letters gleaming in understated silver. Pierce International Holdings. "I need an assistant," he said. "Someone who doesn't waste time on flattery or masks. Someone who understands respect even when it isn't earned. Come work for me." Loriane stared, the words lodging in her throat. It felt like a mistake, like a trick. Men like him didn't pluck women like her from behind counters. Men like him didn't offer opportunity without strings that could strangle. I can't," she whispered. "I don't belong in your world." His eyes held hers, steady, relentless. "You belong exactly where you choose to stand. Don't underestimate yourself." She gripped the counter, her breath shaky. "Why me?" "Because you're different." His words were quiet, but carried the weight of truth. "Everyone else I meet wants something from me. Power, money, influence. You don't. That makes you dangerous. And valuable." Her pulse thundered in her ears. Dangerous? Valuable? She was a woman barely holding her rent together, a girl with kindness as her only weapon. And yet, he looked at her as though she were the rarest thing he'd ever seen. Rowena's laughter echoed faintly from the kitchen, oblivious to the world tilting in the front room. Outside, the rain eased, a pale sliver of light breaking through the gray. Bryson Pierce pushed the card closer, his voice steady, final. "Think about it. Tomorrow. Same time." And with that, he rose, his coat brushing the edge of the counter, and left her standing there with her heart pounding against her ribs. Would you accept a job offer from a man who could destroy you with a single word? The next week blurred like a storm. Loriane stood at the foot of a tower she'd only ever passed from the sidewalk, its glass stretching into the gray sky like a challenge. Bryson's card burned in her pocket. Against every instinct that told her she didn't belong, she had walked through the revolving doors of Pierce International Holdings. Inside, the air smelled of polished stone and power. Floors gleamed so brightly they seemed to reflect not just shoes, but every insecurity she carried. The reception desk was manned by a woman in a fitted blazer whose eyes skimmed over Loriane's plain dress with faint disdain. Loriane clasped her hands to stop them from trembling. "Loriane Hale," she managed, giving her name softly. "Mr. Pierce asked me to—" The receptionist's brows arched in open skepticism before she picked up the phone. Moments later, Clarita swept into the lobby. Perfect hair, pearl earrings, heels that clicked with authority. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "So you're the candidate," Clarita said smoothly, looking Loriane over like merchandise. "Follow me." The walk to the top floor felt endless. Staff glanced up from their desks as she passed, whispers trailing like smoke. She heard fragments. "Cafe girl," "Pierce's whim," "won't last a week." Her stomach twisted, but she kept her chin steady. Bryson was waiting in his office, framed by glass walls that revealed the entire city. He looked up from a file, expression as unreadable as ever, but his gaze softened when it landed on her. "You came." "I wasn't sure I should," she admitted, voice quiet. "You should," he said simply, as though the matter were settled. He gestured to a desk near his own. "This will be yours. Clarita will brief you." Clarita's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The first days were brutal. Loriane was unused to the clipped rhythm of corporate life, the constant shuffle of papers, the language of deals spoken in numbers she barely understood. More than once she spilled pens across her desk or misplaced a file. Snickers followed. One junior executive made a cruel joke about her barista resume within earshot, and the laughter stung. But Bryson noticed things others didn't. When she wrote handwritten thank you notes to clients after meetings, a habit from the café, he paused at her desk, fingers brushing one card. "No one does this anymore," he murmured. "Maybe they should," she replied, surprised at her own courage. "Sometimes people need to know they're seen." His eyes lingered on her, a flicker of something warmer than his usual steel. She treated Curtis the same way when she ran into him polishing floors late one evening. He worked nights here too, shoulders stooped, mop in hand. Most executives stepped around him as if he were invisible. Loriane crouched to help him wring a stubborn mop, laughing when water splashed across her sleeve. "Miss Hale," Curtis said, startled. "You don't need to—" "It's just water," she said gently. "And it looks easier with two hands." From his office doorway, Bryson watched, unseen. His chest tightened with something he refused to name. But not everyone looked kindly on her presence. Clarita's smile grew sharper each day, her voice dripping with a sweetness that hid barbs. She offered Loriane impossible stacks of documents to file, scheduled conflicting tasks, corrected her in front of staff with icy precision. One afternoon, Clarita leaned against Loriane's desk, pearl earrings catching the light. "You know, assistants here usually have degrees, years of experience. You must be very special." Loriane met her gaze, heart pounding. "I'm just doing my best." Clarita's smile curved like a knife. "We'll see how long that lasts." Still, through the strain, attraction simmered where she least expected it. There were moments, brief, stolen, when Bryson's guard slipped. When they brushed hands passing a file, heat lingered longer than it should. When she asked about his day, his answers grew longer than his usual clipped sentences. Once, during a late night of work, their eyes met across the desk lamp's glow, and silence thickened with unspoken things neither dared name. He found himself drawn to the cadence of her voice, the way she listened without judgment. She found herself startled by his rare, dry humor, the ghost of a smile when she teased him for scowling too much. But every step forward seemed matched by an obstacle. Staff eyed her like an intruder. Rumors spread, whispers of favoritism, of an affair that hadn't yet begun but already lived in gossip. Clarita fanned the flames subtly, ensuring the office air thickened with suspicion. And Loriane herself carried the weight of doubt. Each night she returned to her small apartment, counting tips she no longer needed but still saved. She feared waking to find it had all been a mistake, that she was nothing more than a passing distraction for a man who could erase her with a word. The rain outside had stopped, but inside, the storm was only beginning. The weeks inside Pierce International blurred into a rhythm of clipped meetings, late-night emails, and constant whispers that seemed to cling to Loriane's back like shadows. Yet beneath the suffocating air of suspicion, something unspoken had begun to grow between her and Bryson, something fragile, dangerous, and impossible to ignore. It was late on a Wednesday evening when she stumbled on the truth. The office had emptied hours ago, the glass towers outside glowing with city lights when she noticed Bryson's office door slightly ajar. She had been organizing files, determined to prove she was more than the girl from the café, when she heard his voice. Low, uncharacteristically shaken. "I told you I'm not coming," he muttered into the phone. A pause. Then sharper, colder. "I don't care if he doesn't have much time left. He made his choices. He's not my father anymore." The silence after was so heavy, Loriane almost stepped back, but her foot caught the edge of the carpet and the door pushed wider. Bryson stood inside, shoulders tense, hand white-knuckled around the receiver. His eyes met hers, and for the first time since she had met him, his armor cracked. "You heard?" he said flatly. She hesitated, unsure if she should apologize, but something in his gaze stopped her. "I didn't mean to," she admitted softly. "But I did." His jaw tightened. "Then you know. He's dying, and I won't go." "Because you hate him?" "Because I can't forgive him." His voice was raw now, jagged edges breaking through the steel. "He taught me that love is a weapon, that kindness is just another leash. Do you know what that does to a boy? To watch the one person who should protect you turn every moment into a test? To find out the only thing he cared about was what I could become for his empire?" Her heart ached at the confession, the bitterness laced with grief. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He shook his head, a humorless laugh escaping. "Don't be. It made me what I am." Ruthless, strong, untouchable. His eyes darkened, and his next words carried the weight of a wound never healed. And alone. Loriane stepped closer, instinct overruling fear. You're not alone now. The words hung between them. He looked at her as though she had spoken in a language he hadn't heard in years. For a moment, he seemed to fight himself, torn between pushing her away and holding on. Then, in a rare surrender, he sat heavily in the chair behind his desk, burying his face in his hands. And Bryson Pierce, the man the world believed unbreakable, broke in front of her. She knelt beside him, her hand brushing his arm. The contact was simple, tentative, but it steadied him. He lifted his head, eyes burning, walls crumbling. I trusted once, he said quietly. A woman. I thought she saw me, not just the name. But she wanted the power, the money. When I gave her my heart, she sold it for a contract. Since then, kindness feels like a lie. Loriane's throat tightened. No wonder her politeness had unsettled him. No wonder her smile had seemed dangerous. To him, it was the one thing he couldn't buy and the one thing he no longer trusted. You don't have to trust everyone, she murmured, her voice trembling with the weight of it. Just maybe me. His gaze locked on hers, unguarded, vulnerable. And in that fragile moment, the distance between them dissolved. He reached for her, not with the commanding presence he wore in boardrooms, but with the quiet desperation of a man who had been starved of touch. Their lips met, tentative at first, then deepening as though both of them had been waiting without knowing it. It wasn't just a kiss. It was the crumbling of walls, the meeting of two worlds that should never have touched. Her fingers tangled in his hair, his hand lingered at her waist, reluctant to let go. When they parted, breathless, the silence carried more truth than any words. But the world beyond his office door had already sharpened its knives. Clarita had watched Loriane carefully for weeks, her jealousy growing with every glance Bryson spared the girl. She had spent years perfecting herself to be indispensable, untouchable, the only one who could stand at his side. And now, this woman, this nobody from a café, was unraveling everything. The next morning, Clarita made her move. Loriane walked into the boardroom carrying files Bryson had asked her to prepare, only to find half the senior staff already there, eyes cold, expressions tight. Clarita stood at the head of the table, polished smile in place. Miss Hale, she said sweetly, her voice carrying. Perhaps you can explain why these documents, she held up a set of papers, were mishandled under your care and leaked. Quite a plan, don't you think? Whispers rippled through the room. Heat rushed to Loriane's face. She hadn't touched those files. She knew she hadn't. Yet every page bore her initials, scrawled in ink she didn't remember writing. Bryson entered a heartbeat later, his gaze flicking from the papers to Loriane. For the briefest moment, she saw doubt in his eyes. Doubt and disappointment. Her chest tightened, the fragile warmth from the night before shattering into cold dread. And Loriane, standing beneath the weight of every watching eye, felt the first crack of humiliation spread through her. The boardroom smelled of tension, polished wood, stale coffee, and suspicion thick enough to choke on. Loriane stood frozen at the end of the long table, her hands trembling as Clarita's accusations echoed through the glass walls. The documents spread before her bore her initials, forged in careful script. The senior executive's eyes pierced her like knives. She leaked them, Clarita declared smoothly, her smile sharp as glass. These contracts were in her care. We've traced the breach to her access point. That's impossible, Loriane whispered, but her voice was swallowed by the weight of the room. Is it? Another man pressed, his tone dripping with disdain. She came from nowhere. No experience, no credentials. And suddenly she's trusted with Pierce's files? Her breath caught. She looked to Bryson, desperate for the steadiness she had seen in his gaze so many times before. But his expression was unreadable, carved in stone. "Enough," he said finally, his voice low, commanding silence. All eyes turned to him. Loriane's heart hammered. One word from him could end this, clear her name, save her. But instead, he closed the folder slowly, each movement deliberate. His jaw flexed as he spoke. "Leave us," he told the board. The room emptied reluctantly, the weight of their stares lingering even after the doors shut. Loriane's pulse roared in her ears. "Bryson," she pleaded, stepping forward. "You can't believe this. You know me. I would never—" He raised a hand, silencing her. His eyes were cold now, the warmth she had glimpsed the night of his confession buried deep. "Do I know you, Loriane? You've been here for weeks. I let you into my world, and now, this." He gestured at the forged papers. "The timing is convenient." Her throat closed, hot tears pressing at her eyes. "So you think I did this? That I would betray you? After everything we—" She bit off the last word. Too raw, too dangerous. He looked away, his silence louder than accusation. The crack in her chest widened, splintering into something unbearable. "I thought you saw me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I thought you, of all people, understood." He didn't answer. Pride held him stiff, fear kept him silent, and in that silence, the world caved in. By the end of the day, her desk was empty. Clarita watched with thinly veiled triumph as Loriane packed her few belongings into a small box. The whispers of staff echoed around her like cruel applause. I knew she wouldn't last. Just a distraction. Nothing but a liability. Rowena appeared at the elevator, eyes blazing. "You don't have to do this," she hissed. Loriane forced a smile through the storm in her chest. "Yes, I do. But it's not true." "I know." Her voice cracked. "But he doesn't." The elevator doors opened, cold metal yawning like a verdict. Loriane stepped inside, clutching her box, her knees trembling beneath her. When the doors began to close, she caught one last glimpse of Bryson at the far end of the corridor. He stood there, hands in his pockets, gaze fixed on her. 1,000 words lingered in that look, but none reached his lips. He let the doors close, and that silence cut deeper than any accusation. That night, her apartment felt smaller than ever. The rain returned, tapping at her window like an old ache. She set the box on the counter. Files, a pen, a single thank you note she hadn't finished. Everything reduced to scraps. She sank onto the couch, her body hollow. For years she had believed kindness was her only armor. But now, it had left her defenseless. Maybe Rowena had been right. Maybe the world rewarded cruelty, not gentleness. Maybe kindness was nothing more than a slow path to ruin. Her reflection in the dark window stared back, pale and worn. What did I expect? She thought bitterly. That a man like Bryson Pierce could ever truly see me? That kindness could undo a lifetime of walls? The tears came then, hot and unrelenting, and she pressed her palms to her face as though she could hold herself together. But no smile could save her now. No politeness could erase the betrayal in his eyes. She thought of Curtis, of how he had thanked her for helping him, of Rowena's laughter in the café, of every good morning she had ever offered without expecting anything in return. Was it all foolishness? Or was it the only part of her that was real? Her chest ached with the weight of not knowing. And across the city, in a glass tower that glittered like ice, Bryson stood alone in his office. He stared at the empty desk near his own, the silence pressing hard against him. He told himself he had done the right thing, distance, caution, control. But beneath the steel of his resolve, something else stirred. Guilt, fear, regret. He saw again the way she had looked at him, eyes wide with hurt, voice trembling with betrayal. He had broken something fragile, something he hadn't dared to name. And yet he had stood there, saying nothing, doing nothing. He poured himself a drink, though the taste burned bitter on his tongue. Pride told him to forget her. Fear whispered she was just like the others, a kindness hiding ambition. But another voice, one he had silenced for years, echoed louder. What if you were wrong? He closed his eyes, but her voice followed him into the dark. And in that emptiness, Bryson Pierce, the man who had built an empire on control, realized he had let the one person who saw him slip away. But it was too late, or so he believed. The office felt different without her. For days, Bryson told himself it was easier this way, silence instead of questions, distance instead of risk. Yet each morning he glanced at the desk near his, empty but not forgotten. The absence gnawed at him, loud in its quietness. Then came the report. It was late evening when Curtis shuffled into his office with hesitant steps. Bryson looked up, irritation rising, but paused when he saw the man clutching a folder tight to his chest. "Mr. Pierce," Curtis said carefully, "I don't mean to intrude, but I thought you should see this." Bryson frowned, gesturing him closer. Curtis placed the folder on the desk, his hands rough and trembling. Inside were copies of access logs, security timestamps, details no one had bothered to show him during the boardroom ambush. "She didn't do it," Curtis said, his voice low but certain. "Those files were planted. I saw Miss Clarita with them before the meeting. She told me to take them upstairs, said Miss Hale had left them. I didn't think much of it until now." Bryson's pulse tightened. He scanned the logs, the forged signatures, the timestamps overlapping with meetings Clarita herself had scheduled. The pieces aligned with brutal clarity. Clarita had set Loriane up. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. He had believed the lie. Worse, he had doubted the one person who had never lied to him, never wanted anything but to give freely. Her kindness hadn't been weakness. It had been strength, and he had crushed it under suspicion. His chair scraped back sharply, the sound cutting the air. "Where is she now?" Curtis hesitated. "I heard Rowena say she was offered work at a café across town, but she hasn't decided. She's not herself anymore." Bryson didn't wait. He grabbed his coat, his keys, and for the first time in years, his control cracked. Fear, raw and consuming, pushed him forward. Loriane sat at the corner table of a small café, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of tea. The manager had been kind, offering her a position when she walked in with her quiet voice and tired eyes. It was steady work, honest work, but the idea of returning to another uniform, another endless cycle of good mornings that might never mean anything again, it hollowed her out. She tried to imagine smiling at strangers after the way Bryson had looked at her. Doubt, coldness, betrayal. The memory clawed at her chest until her breath shook. Rowena slid into the chair opposite her, sighing heavily. "So, you gonna take it?" "I don't know," Loriane admitted. "I thought maybe starting over somewhere else would help." Rowena studied her, eyes softening. "Or maybe you're running from something you don't want to lose." Loriane looked down at her tea. "He didn't believe me, Ro. Not for 1 second. That's what hurts most. After everything we shared, he didn't even fight for me." Rowena reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "Then let him go. If he can't see you, he doesn't deserve you." Loriane nodded, but her heart whispered otherwise. The city blurred past Bryson's car windows, neon lights streaking like veins of fire. His grip on the wheel was tight, his chest a storm of regret. He replayed every moment with her, the way she helped Curtis without hesitation, the way she greeted every soul with the same respect, the way she kissed him with nothing to gain and everything to lose. She had been real, genuine, and he had doubted her. When he pulled up outside the small café, his breath caught. Through the rain-streaked glass, he saw her. Loriane. Her shoulders slumped, her smile forced for Rowena, her hands trembling slightly as she lifted the mug. She looked smaller, dimmer, as if he had stolen the light she once carried. He stepped inside, the bell above the door ringing sharp in the quiet. Heads turned, whispers rising at the sight of him, but he saw only her. Loriane froze, mug halfway to her lips. Rowena swore softly, standing as if ready to shield her. But Bryson's eyes never left Loriane's. He approached slowly, each step weighted with the fear she might stand and walk away before he could speak. His voice, when it came, was rougher than he intended. I was wrong. Her breath hitched, her knuckles white around the mug. About what? Everything. He stopped at her table, his heart hammering. You didn't betray me. Clarita did. Curtis saw her. I have proof. But that's not what matters most. What matters is that I doubted you. That I let fear blind me to the truth I should have known from the start. Rowena's eyes narrowed, but she slipped away quietly, leaving them in the charged silence. Loriane stared at him, anger and grief warring in her eyes. Do you have any idea what that did to me? To be accused like that? To be looked at like I was nothing but another lie? I do now, he said, voice breaking. And I hate myself for it. You're the only person who's ever seen me, not the money, not the power. Me. And I threw it away because I was too afraid to believe you could be real. Her eyes burned, tears threatening. I gave you everything, Bryson. My trust, my heart. And you shattered it. He dropped to one knee beside her chair, his pride stripped bare. The café went silent around them, strangers watching but unimportant. His hand trembled as he reached for hers. I know. But I'm here now. Not as the man with an empire, but as the man who can't breathe without you. Please, Loriane, don't let my mistake be the end of us. Her chest ached with the weight of his words, with the sight of him, this man the world called ruthless, kneeling, begging, his walls torn down. Silence stretched. Then, slowly, her fingers uncurled, slipping into his. The contact was electric, fragile, real. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but this time they weren't only from pain. Don't hurt me again, she whispered. Never, he vowed, his voice fierce with truth. You are the only thing that makes me human again. Their foreheads touched, breaths mingling, and the café faded until there was only them, two souls colliding in raw, unguarded truth. The boardroom was packed. Executives shuffled papers, adjusted ties, whispered in low tones, all pretending calm while the storm gathered. At the head of the long, polished table, Clarita stood poised, pearls gleaming at her ears, her smile confident and sweet. She believed victory was hers. The café girl gone, Bryson back under her control, the empire safe in her hands. But when the double doors opened and Bryson strode in, silence rippled through the room. His presence filled the air, sharper than the scent of cologne and paper. And he wasn't alone. Loriane stepped in behind him. Her posture was uncertain, her hands clasped tightly at her front, but her eyes held something steadier than fear. She had agreed to come only after his desperate insistence, after the words he had spoken in that small café that shook her walls. You make me human again. Now, as she stood beneath the heavy stairs of Pierce International's finest, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. Bryson didn't hesitate. He took his seat at the head of the table, his gaze sweeping the room like a blade. Before we begin, there is something I need to address. Clarita tilted her head, serene as glass. Of course, Mr. Pierce. He turned his gaze on her, and for the first time in years, his steel cut inward rather than outward. You framed Miss Hale. The words landed like thunder. Gasps broke around the table, eyes widening. Clarita's smile faltered but returned quickly. Excuse me? I have evidence, Bryson said coldly, tossing a folder onto the table. Pages spilled out, timestamps, signatures, testimony. You planted the documents, falsified the logs, and manipulated this board into condemning an innocent woman. The room erupted in whispers. Clarita paled but kept her composure. This is absurd. I've been loyal to you for years. Why would I? Because loyalty isn't the same as ambition, Bryson cut in, his voice steady and merciless. And you mistook ambition for entitlement. You thought if you removed her, you could finally be what you were never meant to be. Clarita's composure cracked. Her? She's nothing, Bryson. A nobody. A cafe girl who smiles too much. She doesn't belong here. That's where you're wrong. Bryson's voice rang with finality, silencing every whisper. He rose, his gaze sweeping the room, landing finally on Loriane. She belongs more than anyone else, because she reminds me of what this empire was meant to be, because she gives without asking, because she sees me, not the money, not the power, me. Loriane's breath caught. Her heart hammered, fear and hope tangling into one impossible knot. Bryson turned back to the board. Clarita is finished here. Effective immediately. She is dismissed. Security will escort her out. The room froze. Clarita's eyes widened, fury spilling through her polished veneer. You'll regret this, she hissed, her voice cracking for the first time. But the guards had already moved forward. The sharp click of her heels echoed down the hall as she was led away. Her reign ended in humiliation. The silence that followed was suffocating. All eyes turned to Bryson, waiting. But he looked only at Loriane. His voice softened, though it carried to every corner of the room. I made a mistake once. I doubted you. I let fear convince me kindness was weakness. But you, Loriane, you showed me its strength. You've given me more than anyone ever has, and I threw it away. I won't make that mistake again. Her chest ached, tears blurring her vision. The weight of every betrayal, every doubt, every whisper still clung to her. Bryson, she whispered, her voice breaking. How do I know this isn't just another performance? Another speech for the boardroom? He stepped toward her, closing the space between them until only air and truth separated them. His hand trembled as he reached for hers. Because this isn't about them. This is about me, choosing you, even if it strips me bare. I don't care if I lose the empire, the board, the name. None of it matters without you. The words cut through her like sunlight breaking storm clouds. Vulnerability poured from him, raw and unguarded. A man who had built his world on pride, now laying it down at her feet. Loriane's heart fought itself. Fear of being hurt again, battling the relentless pull of the man before her. She searched his face, the steel cracked, the pride undone, and what she found was not the ruthless titan the world feared, but the man who had once kissed her like he was drowning and she was air. Her hand slipped into his, trembling but sure. A murmur rippled through the room, but neither of them heard it. Bryson cupped her face with his other hand, his thumb brushing away the tear that escaped down her cheek. Don't hurt me again, she whispered, the echo of her deepest fear trembling on her lips. Never, he vowed, his voice thick with truth. And then, as the board watched in stunned silence, he kissed her. Not as a performance, not as a display, but as a man stripped of pride, desperate and certain all at once. The world around them dissolved, leaving only the thunder of hearts and the taste of forgiveness. When they parted, foreheads pressed together, the room erupted, some in shock, some in applause, some in outrage. But it didn't matter. For the first time, it truly didn't matter. Because Loriane believed him, and Bryson Pierce, the man who had built an empire on fear, had finally chosen love over pride. I never thought silence could feel this alive. For most of my life, silence had been the echo of empty mansions, the sterile hum of boardrooms, the weight of fear pressing against every word left unsaid. Silence meant distance, power, loneliness disguised as control. But now silence meant something else entirely. It meant the scratch of Loriane's pen beside me as she signed a document, the steady rhythm of her breath when she read reports aloud, the warmth of her presence anchoring me in a room that had once been nothing but glass and steel. She wasn't my assistant anymore, not the girl framed by Clarita, not the scapegoat I had doubted. She was my equal, my partner, my choice. I made it official the day I placed a new title plate on the desk beside mine. Co-director, Pierce International. The board had gawked, muttered, resisted. Some tried to argue, citing tradition, experience, pedigree, but I silenced them with the truth. She saved me, and if she can change me, she can change this empire. And she did. Within weeks, the culture began to shift. Staff who once kept their heads down now lingered longer, laughing at small jokes she scattered like light across the corridors. Meetings that used to suffocate with tension eased as she remembered names others forgot, birthdays no one celebrated, kindnesses no one thought mattered. Curtis, who had polished those floors unnoticed for years, now walked through the halls with pride. She insisted he be given recognition. And when I signed the order that doubled his pay, I realized how blind I'd been to the humanity in front of me all along. Her presence softened the edges I once sharpened like blades. She didn't erase my steel. She tempered it. And for the first time, my empire breathed. Still, one shadow remained. My father. I had sworn I would never see him again. The man who carved cruelty into my bones, who taught me love, was weakness and power the only shield. But as his health declined, a quiet voice, hers, urged me forward. "You don't have to forgive him," Loriane told me, her hand wrapped around mine one night. "But don't let his absence become another wound you carry forever. Closure is its own kind of strength." So I went. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and endings. My father lay small against the white sheets, a pale husk of the titan who had once towered over me. His eyes opened slowly when I entered. "I didn't expect you," he rasped. "Neither did I." The words lodged in my throat, but I forced them out. "You broke me. You made me believe kindness was a leash, trust a weakness. You taught me to build walls so high no one could climb them. And for years, I thought that made me strong." He coughed, a bitter sound, but there was no fight left in him. And now? Now I know strength is letting someone in, and I learned that from her, from Loriane. His eyes flickered. Regret, sorrow, something too fractured to name. Then, "Maybe you'll do better than I did." I didn't forgive him that night. Some wounds never close cleanly, but I placed my hand over his frail one, and for the first time, I didn't feel only anger. I felt release. The past loosened its grip. And when I walked out of that hospital into the waiting night, Loriane's arms wrapped around me, and I knew reconciliation wasn't about erasing pain. It was about choosing not to carry it alone anymore. Weeks later, we returned to the café where it had all begun. The rain outside was gentle this time, misting the windows instead of pounding them. We sat at our old table near the glass, cups of coffee steaming between us. She smiled as she stirred sugar into hers, the same way she had on the morning our worlds first collided. "Strange, isn't it?" she said softly, eyes glinting. "All of this started with you scaring my customers?" I chuckled, shaking my head. "And you smiling at me like I was human." "You always were," she whispered. But I knew the truth. No, not until you. The world saw an empire. Enemies saw a weapon. Even I only saw a machine. But you were the only one who ever saw me. Her hand slipped over mine on the table, steady, warm, grounding. Tears shimmered in her eyes, but her smile trembled with joy. "And you," she said, her voice breaking just enough to make my chest ache. "You were the only one who ever believed my kindness wasn't foolish." I leaned closer, my forehead brushing hers, my voice barely above a breath. "You've changed me, Loriane, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving I'll never let you go again." Her lips met mine, soft and certain, sealing not just forgiveness but the promise of everything still to come. The café hummed around us, cups clinking, doors opening, rain tapping faintly at the glass. But all of it blurred until there was only us, two souls who had clawed their way through suspicion, betrayal, and fear, to find something stronger than either of us thought possible. Love. Not the kind built on fantasy or fleeting desire, but the kind forged in fire, tempered by trust, reborn in truth. When we parted, her head rested against my chest, and for the first time in years, I felt peace. Real, unshakable peace. Do you believe kindness can change even the coldest hearts? Tell me in the comments. I'll be reading every word.